proof that IRS taxes are voluntary?
We collect $3 trillion a year in a voluntary compliance system.
It is critical to the integrity of the U.S. tax system, which is only functional because taxpayers voluntarily pay their taxes. According to the National Taxpayer Advocate, 98% of all tax revenue paid by American taxpayers is paid voluntarily. 98% is voluntarily.
We have to maintain the confidence in the system because it's a voluntary system of payment of our taxes.
Agreed.
Inexcusable activity took place because it erodes the confidence of the American people in a system where they participate voluntarily. We need to clean up and clear out so we can go back to the business of making sure that people respect the fact that we have a voluntary system of paying our taxes.
It's probably ultimately damaging to the sense of voluntary compliance, which underlies our entire tax system.
Due to constitutional limitations, most Americans are not required to file income tax returns and pay income tax. The U.S. government finances its operations from the unconstitutional creation of fiat money, not with revenue from income taxes.
I call a magic money computer any computer which can just make money out of thin air. That's magic money.
Finding the votes to pass a spending bill can be hard, but finding the money is never a problem. They just create it. No taxpayers were involved in that process. It was all done using nothing more than a computer keyboard.
I think we found now 14 magic money computers. Where
14, okay.
They just send money out of nothing. They're mostly at Treasury, some at HHS, one or two at State, there's some at DOD.
IRS commissioners like John Koskinen and others publicly told us over and over that IRS taxes were voluntary.
Voluntary compliance system. Voluntary compliance. Voluntary compliance. Voluntary compliance. Voluntary compliance.
Exactly. The IRS compliance rate is entirely based on...
I volunteer as tribute. I believe we have a volunteer.
If there were a law making us liable, that they would have shown it to us by now. If the public knew the truth, they would no longer believe the lie.
An agency which will unlawfully impose a tax that doesn't exist is not going to care. This is the Internal Revenue Code. The unlawful application of this document by the Internal Revenue Service has enslaved the nation that this document attempted to free.
Why do you think you've been able to get away with not paying or filing your income taxes for so long?
Well, first of all, I've not gotten away with anything. I'm not hiding from anyone. I'm simply asking the IRS to show me the laws that apparently require me to do these things, and they are suspiciously reticent to answer questions from me, and of course there are millions of other people, many other organizations who have attempted to get answers. They act very suspiciously when asked to simply sit down at the table with the American people and discuss what their obligations are. Rather than pulling up a chair, they pull out a club.
These liens that are recorded against people by the government for tax liens are nothing more than allegations. They are non-substantive. They have never been determined by a neutral third party, such as a court, to have one shred of validity.
If you ever get a notice of an audit or anything else, the first thing you should do is a Freedom of Information Act request for records that they're using to substantiate or justify the audit.
There is nothing in the Internal Revenue Code that creates any such thing as an income tax evasion or crime. There's nothing in the code that allows IRS agents to seize property. The government is involved in judicial blackmail. The government knows that if it legally seizes somebody's property, that person doesn't have the funds and he can't even get a lawyer who can help him.
I conducted investigations in the Title 18, the criminal code, the U.S. criminal code. And in there, the statutes and the regulations are very specific as to what's violating the statute. In the Internal Revenue Code, Title 26, there's nothing specific in there. I mean, even the FBI is feared the IRS.
You have to understand that an agency which will unlawfully impose a tax that doesn't exist is not going to care. If we, the people, don't know what our rights are, they're not going to tell us.
If Americans just learned that the IRS was actually knowingly deceiving them, that would be enough for them to rise up and put a stop to it.
This small booklet includes the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. This is a document that every citizen should read. It's a document which freed an entire nation. This is the Internal Revenue Code, and this document, and the unlawful application of this document by the Internal Revenue Service has enslaved the nation that this document attempted to free.
Open your eyes up.
The Supreme Court defined income as profit or gain from capital and labor combined. This does not include our private work, the wages of a man or a woman living free in the 50 states of the United States of America. If you thought that your labor was taxable, then you were told a lie.
End the Fed and all central banks. The second source of funding for the ruling elites, besides the money extorted from the public in the form of taxes, comes from the central banks. Central banks are allowed to create paper money out of thin air. This reduces the purchasing power of money and destroys the savings of average people. It does not and cannot make society as a whole richer, but it redistributes income and wealth within society. The earliest receiver of the newly created money, that is usually the ruling elites, are thereby made richer, and the later and latest receiver, that is the average citizen, are made poorer. The central bank's manipulation of interest rates is the cause of boom-bust cycles. The central bank permits the accumulation of ever greater public debt that is shifted as a burden onto unknown future taxpayers or is simply inflated away. And as a facilitator of public debt, the central banks are also the facilitators of wars. This monstrosity must end and be replaced by a system of free, competitive banking built on the foundation of a genuine commodity money such as gold and silver.
The law itself is very general, so you can't tell who it applies to or where it applies. So you look at the regulation, they tell you exactly where it applies. Right? So what Victor did, if you look at section 61 of subtitle A of the Internal Revenue Code, it gives the definition of gross income. Now everybody in here, they say, what is your gross income, right? So he goes and looks at the regulation, which defines the gross income. And guess what he found? He says, 1.6115 says it's only option income. That's all it is. And if you don't believe it, I'll show you their own little chart. This is where, see, you look at these little charts. These charts are wonderful because they're not made up by the Internal Revenue Service. They're made up, the Office of Management and Budget approves them, and then the Federal Register puts them in here. Okay, let's see. Yeah, right here. Okay, see right here, 1.6115. See, 1 indicates individual income tax. That's the part number. 61 indicates the section. Okay, and then the 15 is just a subpart of that. All right. And when you go and you read that regulation, it says that only applies to option income. Now, how much option income do you have this last year? Not too much, right? Okay. And what Victor did, I don't know if you saw what he said right here at the last of his little, this was a fax he sent over to me. I love this. So anytime an attorney signs it with a happy face, I'm telling you, this guy's unusual, you know. But he said, what he says here, he says the revenue officer goes crazy when I show him this, because he goes in and gives them the reg and says my client didn't have any option income this last year, you know, so there's no reason for him to file the form. And they go, like, what? You know, they've never seen this regulation before. None of these guys have ever seen the regulations. They are deliberately kept in the dark by their superiors. Okay, so this is just another way that you can beat them, you know, easily, you know, without being overly aggressive. You just simply understand what the procedures are. If you understand those procedures, then you can get them. Okay, now there was a letter that a guy named Richard Durjack got in May. His was dated May of '94. I saw it in October of '94, And as soon as I saw that letter, I said, man, I got to have one of those with my name on it, because it was from the Federal Register. And here's the questions that Richard had to ask the Federal Register. Okay, now you have to remember the Federal Register is the nation's legal newspaper. That's where all public notices from Washington, D.C. come from, so that we can see what we have if we have some liability or some obligation. That's where we find out about it. Okay, the second question here was, has the Internal Revenue Service incorporated by reference in the Federal Register a requirement to make an income tax return? Now the reason that's important is because if they don't put it in the Federal Register, then they can't hold you to do it. So it's very important that it be there, right? Okay, now here's the letter he got back. This is from Michael White, who is an attorney there at the Federal Register. Now just look at the second part here. Our records indicate that the Internal Revenue Service has not incorporated by reference in the Federal Register a requirement to make an income tax return. So who's required to do it? Nobody. That's right. But how many people know that it's not in the Federal Register and that there's even a requirement to be there? Not too many, right? So if you don't know, then they play on your ignorance, and you have to go along with it, because if you don't know and you don't do it, then they're gonna beat you up. Okay, that's what they do. But if you know and you took this letter down there and says, hey guys, there's no requirement for filing an income tax return in the listed in the Federal Register by reference, would you please show it to me, because I can't find it, and if you can show it to me, I'll be happy to fill it out. Yeah, I'll go ahead and fill out the form right here. Guess what? They're not ever going to show it to you because it doesn't exist. But without that, they can't proceed. See? So this is why it's important for you to understand that. Now, another thing that you need to understand, that all forms are also required to be published in the Federal Register. Guess what form hasn't been published in the Federal Register? The 1040. Right. You're exactly right. Actually, more than that. There's virtually no forms of the Internal Revenue Service that are there, including the 2555. It's not there. Neither is the W-2. Neither is the W-4. Neither is the 1099. Neither, you name them, they're virtually not there. I think, as a matter of fact, a couple of friends of mine who are paralegals, they got on a conference call. Once they found out that the 1040 wasn't there, they wanted to know, what is there? And so they got on a conference call with the Federal Register and asked them this specific question, because they couldn't find it by reference.